Hi there, and welcome back to Understanding Depression. Thank you so much for choosing to be here. Whether you're a regular listener or tuning in for the first time, I'm truly grateful for your time and presence. In this episode, we're diving into a deeply important and sometimes difficult topic: how childhood trauma can lead to adult depression. If you're someone who has experienced tough moments in your early life, or you know someone who has, this episode is for you. And even if your childhood felt relatively stable, understanding how trauma works can make us all more empathetic and better equipped to support others. So let's walk through this gently and mindfully together. And as always, if you find this helpful, feel free to like, share, or subscribe. It truly helps us reach more people who might need to hear this. Let's start with a simple question that's not always so simple to answer. What exactly is childhood trauma? Trauma in childhood doesn't always look like a dramatic event. It can be sudden or subtle. It can come from physical or emotional abuse, neglect, bullying, witnessing violence, or even the loss of a caregiver. In some cases, it's the absence of what should have been there: love, safety, or stability. What makes childhood trauma especially powerful is the timing. When we're young, our brains and bodies are still developing. We're learning how to regulate emotions, how to feel safe, and how to build relationships. Trauma can interrupt all of that. And if the trauma is repeated, ignored, or minimized, the child might start to develop deep-rooted beliefs like, "I'm not safe, I'm not lovable, this is my fault." These beliefs don't always go away with time. In fact, they often follow us into adulthood, quietly shaping how we think, feel, and act. In the next segment, we'll explore how these early experiences affect the brain and set the stage for adult depression. Let's talk about the science for a moment. Childhood isn't just a time of learning ABCs and riding bikes. It's also when the brain is wiring itself in response to the environment. So what happens when that environment is full of fear, unpredictability, or pain? Well, research shows that childhood trauma can actually change the architecture of the brain. One of the most affected areas is the amygdala, the part of the brain that detects threats and activates our fight or flight response. In people who experience early trauma, the amygdala often becomes hyperactive. That means even as adults, they may feel on edge or anxious, even when there's no clear danger. Another area is the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in thinking clearly, decision-making, and regulating emotions. Trauma can slow its development, making it harder to manage intense emotions or cope with stress in healthy ways. Then there's the hippocampus, the part of the brain that helps process memories and link emotions to them. Trauma can cause this area to shrink, which may explain why people with traumatic pasts often struggle with memory issues or flashbacks. These brain changes aren't just theoretical. They help explain why survivors of childhood trauma are at a higher risk for depression, anxiety, PTSD, and even physical health problems later in life. But here's the key message: these changes aren't permanent. With support, therapy, and healing, the brain can adapt. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, is real. That's part of the hope in all of this. In our next segment, we'll explore how the emotional wounds from childhood trauma play out in everyday adult life, and why it's not always obvious that trauma is at the root of someone's depression. Sometimes, people think that trauma has to be dramatic or obvious, but the reality is, many adults struggling with depression don't even realize that childhood trauma is at the root of it. Why? Because trauma doesn't always show itself through flashbacks or nightmares. It can show up in more subtle, everyday ways, like feeling numb or disconnected from your emotions, struggling to trust people or form close relationships, constantly feeling like you're not good enough, even when there's no clear reason. A deep, persistent sadness that doesn't seem to match your current life situation. Perfectionism, overworking, or people-pleasing as a way to earn love or avoid rejection. These patterns are often protective mechanisms we developed as kids to survive, but in adulthood, they can keep us stuck in cycles of pain, isolation, and exhaustion. Let's take a real-life inspired example. Emily is 32. She's successful in her job, kind to everyone, and always says yes to requests, even when she's burned out. She often feels empty and overwhelmed but brushes it off as just being tired. What most people don't know is that Emily grew up in a home where love had to be earned. If she didn't perform, didn't help, or didn't meet expectations, she was ignored, or worse, punished. So she learned to suppress her own needs to stay safe. Now, decades later, she still believes her worth is tied to how much she can give. This kind of hidden trauma can be hard to detect, but it often fuels a quiet form of depression that doesn't always look like tears or sadness. Sometimes it looks like high-functioning exhaustion. In our next segment, we'll explore the direct links between trauma and depressive symptoms, and why some people carry these burdens in silence for years. So how exactly does childhood trauma lead to depression in adulthood? The connection is complex, but let's break it down into a few key pieces. First, trauma often leaves behind deep emotional wounds, feelings of shame, abandonment, fear, or unworthiness. When these wounds aren't acknowledged or processed, they can quietly evolve into chronic sadness, low self-esteem, and hopelessness, which are all hallmarks of depression. Second, trauma can disrupt how the brain and body respond to stress. People who've experienced early trauma often have overactive stress responses. Their bodies produce more cortisol, and they may have a harder time calming down after stressful events. Over time, this constant state of stress can lead to emotional exhaustion and depression. Third, trauma can shape how we view the world and ourselves. Someone who was constantly criticized or neglected as a child might grow up believing, "I'm not lovable," or "no one will ever truly be there for me." These thoughts can become automatic beliefs, the kind that quietly run in the background and color every life experience with doubt, fear, or despair. And finally, there's something called learned helplessness. When a child is exposed to pain they can't control, like abuse or instability, they might come to believe that no matter what they do, they can't change their situation. As adults, that belief can morph into the feeling that trying is pointless, that nothing will get better, and that they're stuck forever. And that's exactly what depression sounds like. But here's the thing. Depression rooted in trauma doesn't mean someone is broken or beyond help. It simply means that the sadness is carrying a story. And when we begin to unpack that story, gently, compassionately, and with support, healing becomes possible. In the next part, we'll talk about what healing can actually look like. Because yes, healing is real. And no, it's not too late. So what does healing from childhood trauma and depression actually look like? First, let's be honest. It's not linear. Healing isn't a straight path where you check off boxes and move on. It's often messy, emotional, and full of small victories and setbacks. But what makes healing possible is the presence of safety, compassion, and connection, the very things many people missed out on growing up. Here are some key pieces of the healing journey. 1. Naming the pain. One of the most powerful steps in healing is simply recognizing that what happened to you wasn't okay, and that it wasn't your fault. Many adults carry trauma without ever labeling it as such. But when we name it, we begin to take back the power it held over us in silence. Inner child work. This therapeutic approach invites you to connect with the younger version of yourself, the one who experienced the pain. It's about offering compassion to that child and giving them the love and safety they never received. Sometimes healing means learning to parent yourself in ways your caregivers couldn't. Therapy and support. Working with a therapist, especially one trained in trauma-informed care, can help untangle the complex emotions, beliefs, and coping patterns that stem from early trauma. Approaches like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, IFS, internal family systems, and trauma-focused CBT have shown real effectiveness. Rebuilding beliefs. So many of the beliefs that trauma plants in us are deeply untrue. I'm unworthy. No one can be trusted. I don't matter. Healing means gently rewriting those beliefs. Learning to say, I do deserve love. I am safe now. My feelings are valid. 5. Creating a safe life. Healing also involves reshaping your environment. This might mean setting boundaries, learning to say no, or surrounding yourself with people who respect and support you. No one's healing journey is exactly the same, and that's okay. What matters is that it's possible. And even if you feel like you're starting late or moving slow, you're still moving, and that's enough. Up next, we'll talk about something incredibly important: how to support someone you love who might be carrying the invisible weight of childhood trauma. If you've ever loved someone who struggles with depression rooted in childhood trauma, you know how complex it can be. Maybe they push you away. Maybe they don't open up easily. Or maybe they carry a sadness you can't quite understand. So how do you support someone who's carrying pain they rarely talk about? 1. Lead with empathy. Not fixing. You don't have to fix someone's depression. You can't undo their past. But what you can do is hold space, listen without judgment, validate their feelings, and remind them that they're not alone. Sometimes the most healing words aren't solutions. They're simple things like, I believe you. That sounds really hard. Amirifiu verwant tutuk. 2. Be patient with triggers. People who've experienced trauma may have sensitive nervous systems. They might react strongly to things that seem small to you. That's not overreacting. It's their brain doing what it learned to do to survive. What they need most in those moments is safety, not criticism. Try saying, I see this is bringing something up for you. Do you want to take a break or talk it through? Respect boundaries and autonomy. Some survivors struggle with control because trauma made them feel helpless. Letting them set the pace, make their own choices, and say no without guilt can be incredibly healing. Educate yourself. Read about trauma. Listen to their story if they're open to sharing it. The more you understand what they've lived through, the more compassion you'll be able to bring. Take care of yourself. Loving someone through depression and trauma can be emotionally intense. It's okay to have your own boundaries, to seek support, and to admit when you feel overwhelmed. Your love won't cure their pain, but it can be a lifeline. Because many trauma survivors grew up without anyone consistently in their corner. Just knowing you're not going anywhere can be a powerful part of their healing. In our final segment, we'll close this episode with messages of hope for those still healing, for those still struggling, and for anyone carrying a past that feels too heavy to name. If you've made it this far into the episode, thank you. This conversation isn't easy. It's heavy. It's real. And for many, it's deeply personal. Whether you're someone who's lived through childhood trauma, whether you've carried depression quietly for years, or whether you're just beginning to connect the dots, please hear this. You are not broken. What happened to you was not your fault. And even if it changed you, it does not define you. Depression rooted in trauma can feel like a storm that never ends. But healing is possible. It doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means learning how to live beyond its shadow. There's no timeline for this journey, no perfect way to get better. But every step you take toward awareness, compassion, and self-care counts. And if today all you did was listen and feel a little less alone, that's enough. If you're supporting someone through this, thank you for showing up. You don't have to be perfect, just present, just human. At Understanding Depression, we believe that truth-telling can save lives. And part of that truth is this: trauma doesn't erase your worth. It doesn't make you less deserving of love, help, or peace. So, let's keep this conversation going. Share this episode with someone who might need it. Leave a comment, subscribe, or send us a message. Your voice m'étersire. And remember, even if your past was painful, your future is still yours to write. And you don't have to write it alone. You've been listening to Understanding Depression. I'm grateful for your time, your heart, and your willingness to sit with stories that are often left unspoken. Stay gentle, stay curious, and above all, stay connected. We'll see you in the next episode.